March 20th, 2018, 10:42 p.m. 32-year-old Melissa Carter whispered into a 911 operator's headset, her voice shaking as she said something dispatchers almost never hear this clearly. "My husband is trying to kill me." For the next 22 seconds, the operator hears movement. A door slams somewhere inside the house. Melissa begins to say something else. Then the line goes dead. Police are dispatched immediately to a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. A routine domestic disturbance call suddenly carries the highest possible priority. When officers arrive minutes later, their body cameras capture everything that happens next. The flashing patrol lights, the silent house, the front door slowly opening. But what investigators believed that night turned out to be wrong. Because hidden inside that body cam footage was a detail no one noticed. Not the first officers, not the detectives, not even the jury who later saw the video in court. Everyone watching focused on the same thing. And they all missed the one moment that explained what really happened inside that house. A moment that would sit in plain sight for months, until someone finally saw it. March 20th, 2018, 10:42 p.m. 32-year-old Melissa Carter whispered into a 911 operator's headset, her voice shaking as she said something dispatchers almost never hear this clearly. "My husband is trying to kill me." For the next 22 seconds, the operator hears movement. A door slams somewhere inside the house. Melissa begins to say something else. Then the line goes dead. Police are dispatched immediately to a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. A routine domestic disturbance call suddenly carries the highest possible priority. When officers arrive minutes later, their body cameras capture everything that happens next. The flashing patrol lights, the silent house, the front door slowly opening. But what investigators believed that night turned out to be wrong. Because hidden inside that body cam footage was a detail no one noticed. Not the first officers, not the detectives, not even the jury who later saw the video in court. Everyone watching focused on the same thing. And they all missed the one moment that explained what really happened inside that house. A moment that would sit in plain sight for months, until someone finally saw it. Earlier that day, nothing about Melissa Carter's life suggested that anything was wrong. Friends described her as careful, organized, the kind of person who kept color-coded reminders on her phone and arrived 10 minutes early to everything. She worked as a dental hygienist at a clinic on the north side of Columbus. It was steady work, predictable hours, the kind of routine Melissa preferred. Most mornings started the same way. Coffee at the small kitchen table, a quick scroll through emails, then the 20-minute drive to the clinic, where patients already knew her by name. Co-workers later told investigators she was the calmest person in the office. Not dramatic, not reckless, and not someone who ignored danger signs. Which is why what happened that night confused everyone who knew her. Because Melissa was not the type of person who would stay in a situation that felt unsafe. At least, that is what everyone believed. She had been married to 35-year-old Daniel Carter for just over 4 years. Daniel worked in residential construction. Long hours, physical work, sometimes unpredictable schedules depending on the job site. To neighbors, they looked like a quiet couple. They lived in a modest 2-story house on a calm suburban street lined with maple trees. The kind of neighborhood where porch lights stayed on and people waved when they passed each other backing out of driveways. Nothing about the outside of that house hinted at conflict. But investigators would later learn that inside the home, the last 6 months had been different. Small arguments had started appearing. Nothing explosive at first. Just tension, money disagreements, long work days, missed dinners, normal stress according to Daniel. But Melissa had confided something slightly different to a coworker just 2 weeks before the call. She said Daniel had been acting strangely, quiet for days at a time, then suddenly intense, apologizing for things she did not remember happening. It was the kind of detail that seemed minor at the time. But this is where everything begins to shift, because Melissa had also started changing small habits in her routine. She began texting her sister when she arrived home from work. She started parking her car facing the street instead of the garage. And one night, while having dinner with a friend, she said something that would later stay with investigators. "If anything ever happens, check the house cameras." At the time, it sounded like a joke. But Melissa had installed a small security system 2 months earlier. A doorbell camera, 2 indoor motion cameras, and 1 camera covering the side yard. Simple consumer equipment. Nothing unusual. Still, people rarely say things like that without a reason. But no one asked her what she meant, because at the time there was no emergency. March 20th began like any other Tuesday. Melissa finished work just before 5:30 that afternoon. Surveillance video from the dental clinic shows her laughing with coworkers in the parking lot. No sign of distress. No urgency. Just an ordinary evening beginning. She stopped at a grocery store on the way home and bought ingredients for dinner. Receipts later show pasta, tomatoes, and a small bottle of wine. At 6:18 p.m., her phone connects to the home Wi-Fi network. Daniel's truck is already parked in the driveway. Neighbors later remember seeing lights on in the kitchen around 7. Around 8:15, a neighbor walking his dog passes the house. He notices nothing unusual. No shouting. No disturbance. Just the quiet sounds of a television through the living room window. But sometime after 9:30, something inside the house begins to change. Phone records show Melissa sending a short message to her sister. "Everything okay over there tonight?" Her sister responds 2 minutes later. "Yeah, what?" Melissa never replies. That silence would later raise questions. But at the time no one noticed, because the next confirmed event doesn't happen until more than an hour later. At 10:42 p.m., Melissa Carter dials 911. Dispatch audio reveals a voice barely above a whisper. The operator asks what is happening. Melissa hesitates. Then she says the sentence that sends officers racing toward the address. "My husband is trying to kill me." In the background, something shifts. A thud. Footsteps. The operator asks if she can leave the house. Melissa begins to answer. And then the line goes dead. What officers find when they arrive minutes later will launch an investigation that lasts for years. But the truth of what happened inside that home that night is not immediately clear. Because from the very beginning, everyone believes they already know the answer. And that assumption will cause investigators to overlook something critical. Something recorded clearly on body camera footage. A moment lasting less than 3 seconds. A moment that, if noticed earlier, would have changed everything. At 10:46 p.m., the first patrol unit turns onto Maple Ridge Drive. The neighborhood looks exactly the way officers expect a quiet suburban street to look on a Tuesday night. Porch lights glow along the sidewalks. A few televisions flicker behind living room curtains. Nothing about the area suggests an emergency is unfolding. But the dispatcher's final note over the radio changes the tone. Open line. Caller reported husband trying to kill her. Line disconnected. That kind of call is never treated casually. Officer Brian Keller pulls his patrol car to the curb in front of the Carter house. His body camera activates automatically when he steps out of the vehicle. Red and blue lights wash across the front of the property. The house itself appears calm. Kitchen light on. Front porch light glowing. No visible movement inside. A second unit arrives 30 seconds later. Officers approach the front walkway together. Keller knocks first. Police department. No answer. He knocks again, louder this time. Police. Melissa? Still nothing. But this is where something unusual happens. The front door slowly swings open. Not forced. Not pushed. Just drifting inward as if it had never been fully closed. The officers exchange a quick glance before stepping inside. The body cam footage shows a narrow entry hallway leading into the living room. The television is on, casting a soft blue glow across the walls. A half-empty wine glass sits on the coffee table. Officer Keller calls out again. Melissa Carter. No response. They begin moving through the house, clearing rooms one by one. Kitchen first. Everything looks normal. A pot sits on the stove. The burner is off, but the smell of recently cooked food still lingers in the air. One of the officers radios dispatch. House appears unsecured. No occupants visible yet. They continue down the hallway. Master bedroom. Empty. Closet. Clear. Bathroom. Clear. But as they move deeper into the house, the silence begins to feel heavier. because someone made that 911 call only minutes earlier. And people do not simply disappear in that amount of time. Then at 10:49 p.m., Keller opens the door to a small guest bedroom at the end of the hallway. Inside, the beam of his flashlight lands on something on the floor. Melissa Carter. She is lying partially against the side of the bed, unresponsive. Officers immediately move to her side. Keller checks for a pulse while the second officer calls for medical assistance. Paramedics are requested immediately. Daniel Carter is nowhere in the house. And within minutes, the situation transforms from a welfare check into a full investigation, because Melissa Carter is pronounced dead shortly after paramedics arrive. And the last words she ever spoke were captured on a recorded emergency call. "My husband is trying to kill me." Police quickly begin searching for Daniel. At 11:07 p.m., a second patrol unit spots his truck 3 blocks away, parked near a convenience store. Daniel Carter is inside. He is detained without incident. Bodycam footage from that arrest shows Daniel appearing confused. He repeatedly asks officers what is going on. One officer tells him they received a call from his wife. Daniel immediately shakes his head. That doesn't make sense. But detectives already believe they understand what happened, because the timeline seems simple. Melissa calls 911, accuses her husband. Minutes later, she is found dead inside their home, and Daniel Carter cannot explain why. During the initial interview, Daniel insists he left the house earlier that evening to drive to the store. He says Melissa was alive when he left. Detectives ask when he left the house. Daniel pauses. Around 10:30 maybe. That answer raises immediate suspicion, because the 911 call happened at 10:42 p.m. And according to Daniel, he was already gone. Detectives ask why Melissa would call emergency services and accuse him if he wasn't even home. Daniel has no answer. The case moves quickly. Within 48 hours, prosecutors charge Daniel Carter with the murder of his wife. The evidence, at least on the surface, seems overwhelming. A direct accusation during a 911 call. A husband who admits he was present shortly before the incident. And no signs of forced entry into the home. Investigators begin building the narrative. An argument escalates. Melissa calls for help. Daniel attacks her before officers arrive. Then he leaves the scene. It is a theory that seems to fit the timeline perfectly. But this is where the investigation begins to narrow. Because once detectives believe they know the answer, they stop asking certain questions. The home security cameras Melissa installed are reviewed, but they do not appear to capture anything significant. The front door camera shows no one entering or leaving between 9:30 and when officers arrive. The side yard camera records only darkness and occasional passing headlights. And the indoor motion cameras appear to have stopped recording hours earlier. A technical glitch, according to investigators. Nothing suspicious. Daniel's trial begins 8 months later. Prosecutors play the 911 recording for the jury. Melissa's voice fills the courtroom. "My husband is trying to kill me." For many jurors, that sentence alone feels impossible to ignore. Defense attorneys argue that Daniel left the house before the call was made, but they struggle to explain who else could have been responsible. No other suspects are identified. No evidence suggests anyone else entered the home. After 6 days of testimony, the jury returns a verdict. Guilty. Daniel Carter is sentenced to 25 years in prison. For the Carter family, the case appears closed. But not everyone is convinced, because buried inside the hundreds of hours of investigative material is something investigators barely noticed. Body camera footage from the first officers who entered the home. Footage that had been reviewed only briefly during the trial. Most people watching that video focus on the obvious moment, the discovery of Melissa in the bedroom. But months later, someone reviewing the case notices something different. Something that happens much earlier in the footage. Something so small that nearly everyone missed it. And once it is seen, it raises a question no one asked before. What if Daniel Carter was telling the truth about leaving the house? Because hidden in the corner of that body cam recording is a detail that suggests someone else may have still been inside that home when police arrived. For nearly a year after the trial, the Carter case faded from public attention. Daniel Carter was transferred to a state correctional facility outside Toledo. The house on Maple Ridge Drive sat empty for months before eventually being sold. And for most people connected to the case, the story felt finished. A frightened 911 call. A husband accused. A jury verdict. Closure. But cases that seem simple sometimes leave behind quiet doubts. And in this case, that doubt began with someone who had never even been involved in the original investigation. Her name was Laura Mitchell. Mitchell worked as a digital forensic analyst for a legal nonprofit that reviewed convictions where new evidence might exist. Most of the cases they examined involved DNA testing or witness recantations. The Carter case arrived on her desk because of something much smaller: body camera footage. Daniel's appellate attorney believed the police video had never been carefully analyzed frame by frame. During the trial, it had been shown only briefly to establish the timeline of officers entering the home. No one had studied it in detail. Mitchell decided to take a closer look. The footage from Officer Brian Keller's body camera begins at 10:46 p.m. as his patrol car pulls up to the curb. Mitchell watches the video the same way investigators originally did. First in real time, then again at half speed, then frame by frame. At first, nothing stands out. The flashing lights, the quiet house, the doors slowly drifting open, officers announcing themselves. But Mitchell notices something strange almost immediately. The front door. Everyone who watched the footage focused on the fact that it was open. But Mitchell is not looking at the door. She is looking at the floor. Because just inside the entryway near the edge of the camera frame, something moves. It happens so quickly most viewers never register it. A shadow. Not from the officers. From inside the house. Mitchell rewinds the footage again. At 10:46 and 18 seconds, the door swings inward. The hallway becomes visible. And for less than 2 seconds, a faint shadow crosses the wall at the far end of the hallway, moving away from the officers, moving deeper into the house. It is subtle, but once you see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Mitchell slows the footage even further. Frame by frame, the shape is unmistakable. Someone was moving inside that house when the officers stepped through the door, which raises an immediate question. If Daniel Carter had already been detained 3 blocks away at that time, then who cast that shadow? But this is where everything changes, because Mitchell notices something else in the same sequence of frames. A sound. At normal speed, it blends into the noise of police radios and footsteps. But enhanced audio reveals something distinct. A back door opening. Mitchell checks the floor plan of the Carter home. At the end of the hallway, just past the guest bedroom where Melissa was found, there is a rear door leading to the backyard. The officers never checked it during their initial sweep, and the body camera never points directly toward it, but the shadow in the hallway is moving in that exact direction, which means someone could have left the house seconds before officers reached the back of the property. Now the investigation begins again. Mitchell provides her analysis to Daniel's legal team, who request a formal review of the evidence. For the first time, detectives re-examine the security system Melissa installed months earlier. During the original investigation, officers believed the indoor cameras stopped recording hours before the incident. A malfunction. But digital forensic specialists now examine the device storage more carefully. What they discover explains everything. The cameras did not stop recording. The footage was deleted. Specifically, the recordings from 10:31 p.m. to 10:44 p.m. The exact window surrounding the 911 call. But even deleted files leave traces. Technicians recover fragments of the video data. Not complete footage. Just partial frames. But one of those frames shows something investigators never expected. A man standing inside the hallway. Not Daniel Carter. The man appears to be wearing a dark hooded jacket, and his face is partially visible. When detectives compare the image with local records, a match appears almost immediately. His name is Victor Hale. Hale lived less than a mile away. He had prior arrests for burglary. And more importantly, he had done occasional construction work for Daniel Carter's company the previous year, which means he knew the house. He knew the layout. And he knew when Daniel might be at work. But what investigators eventually uncover is even more disturbing. Phone records show Victor Hale's device connected briefly to a cell tower covering Maple Ridge Drive at 10:39 p.m., 3 minutes before Melissa made the 911 call. Detectives now believe Hale entered the Carter home through the unlocked back door, possibly intending to steal tools he believed were stored in the garage. But inside the house, he encountered Melissa. The confrontation that followed lasted only minutes, long enough for Melissa to hide and make a desperate call to emergency services. "My husband is trying to kill me," not because Daniel was attacking her, but because in the chaos and fear of the moment, Melissa believed the intruder was him. Someone she knew. Someone she recognized from Daniel's work crew. When police arrived, Hale was still inside the house, and the shadow captured on body camera footage shows the exact moment he fled through the back door. A moment that lasted less than 3 seconds. A moment hidden in plain sight. Victor Hale was arrested 11 months after Daniel Carter was sentenced. Faced with the recovered video fragments and cell tower records, he eventually confessed to being inside the house that night. Daniel Carter's conviction was overturned soon after. After nearly 2 years in prison, he walked out of the courtroom a free man. But the case left behind questions that cannot be easily answered, because the truth had been visible from the very beginning, recorded on the body camera of the first officer who stepped through that door. A shadow crossing a hallway. 3 seconds that everyone missed. Sometimes the most important evidence in an investigation is not hidden. It is simply overlooked. And sometimes justice depends on someone being willing to watch just a little more carefully.